Okay, Josh, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine, for that introduction and that land acknowledgement. I'm Joshua. I use he, him pronouns. I been part of MCHC for a while, and then also work with sometimes with the Frankel Lambert Organizing Committee, which is in Christie and DuPont. And I've lived in a co-op when I was a child, but haven't in quite some time, but been quite interested and passionate about them for quite some time. And I'm excited to learn kind of more about the day-to-day of co-op life for, people who are older than 11, which is when I left a co-op.
Thanks for the introduction. Claire, who are you?
Everyone. So I go by Claire, she, her pronouns. My full name's Claire-Hélène Hayes-Boutin, but it's a mouthful, so Claire's just fine. And I'm a member of the Dufferin Grove Housing Co-op, so the one that Emily lived across from. And I actually have a question for Emily later on. So the Dufferin Grove Housing Co-op is a bit of a unique type of cooperative. So we are a scattered co-op, and a scattered co-op means that we have parts. So we're not an apartment building like most of the co-ops that are in the city of Toronto. We have 10 properties across the downtown, the West End. So we've got 5 in Parkdale, we've got 1 on Sororn, and then we've got 2 up on Davenport, or sorry, Dovercourt. So we've got a few different buildings, and some of them are single family, but most of them have just a few units. So 6, 2, 1, 3, sometimes it's like 8 units. And our biggest one has about 26 units. So we're a little bit different. We're also one of the older co-ops. One of the Jims, James or Jim, will be able to probably speak to this a little bit more. But one of the people who originated our co-op is Mark Goldblatt. And so it's this history of a co-op that's a little bit different, and hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that as well. So I'm introducing myself. I should also say I've been a member of the Dufferin Grove Housing Co-op for about 7 years now. I've been on the board a number of times, and through my experience with the Dufferin Grove Housing Co-op, that led me to also be part of the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust and be on the board of that organization as well. So I'll pass it over to James.
Hi, my name is Jim Patterson. I live at Alexander Park Co-op. Alexander Park is at Queen and Bathurst. There are 4 3-floor walk-ups and interconnecting townhouses on 2 different blocks in this area. I've lived here for 40 years almost, and I will be, and I've been on the board for about 20 years. Sometimes as president, sometimes not, although I am currently the president of the co-op. And I think that's it.
Loretta?
Hi. Hello, my name is Loretta Perez. Nice to see everyone. I am a member of Arauco Co-op. I am also involved with the Franco Lambert Outreach Committee that Josh is a part of. Outreach, yeah, that's what we're doing. And it's a made up. So the neighborhood that I live in, and Josh used to live in as well, is made up of 4 co-ops. So there's Arauco Cooperative Housing, which is the created by Chilean refugees in the 70s. We have Lotus Co-op, which came out of Vietnamese refugees, again, and around the same era. Constant Hamilton, which is just next door to us, which is a women's run co-op, and Fred Dowling Co-op on Melita Crescent. And that one was created by the union workers. And I believe some members, if they are here, they can clear that up as well. And we also have a few Toronto community housing co-ops all over the place. We have on both ends of the one on Christie and another right next to Shaw. So it's a great community to come to if you want to walk around and look at how a neighborhood full of co-ops is, because it's so tight knit. So I like to call it kind of a suburb in the city because everybody knows each other. because as most people will know, there's hardly any turnover. So most people have been here for their whole lives. And we also have many private houses along the neighborhood. So we have a bit of that experience also seeing people moving in and out from the private homes. I was also a member of my board earlier on in 2017, and now just very interested in keeping up with the co-ops because of being a member of the board. I was able to win a scholarship through CHFT. It was and I'll find the name of the scholarship. It was one of the leaders in. I remembered when Claire said Mark Goldblatt. I forget her name. She just passed away, so I have to remember that because that's a shame that I don't know. I don't remember, but yeah, I'll pass it on to, I believe, Jim. Maybe if he hasn't spoken.
Yes. Hi, I'm Jim Rutham, he, him. I am both a member of Alexander Park Co-op as same as Jim Patterson, and also a member of MCHC. So I'm working on so I'm part of the existing co-op movement and trying to expand it more or less aggressively. I've lived here for most of the past 40 years. I've also been on the board and been president. And I have mostly been the finance chair for almost all of the time that I've been here. So I am exquisitely familiar with the dollars and cents components of running a co-op.
Well, we are in good hands to learn about what life is like in a co-op and also what running a co-op is like. So we're going to spend about the next 30 minutes having a rather open conversation, hearing from our 4 speakers. What are some of the benefits of living in a co-op? What makes living in a co-op unique? And also, what are some of the challenges of living in a co-op? Is there someone who would like to start? Yes, Josh.
So just to make sure we're all on the same page about so we designed this event kind of to be like to serve people who might not know what a co-op is. I don't know how housing co-op specifically. I don't know how much that actually is our audience, but I put together a 3-slide little thing about it. So it'll take ideally a minute. I noticed some people in the, can people see this? Wait, is it the wrong screen? There, can people see that?
Yep.
Cool. I am back to two monitors and I forgot how that worked. So I did notice some people in the chat asking some more specific questions around the mechanics of co-ops. And this is a good time to plug our next event next week, which will dive more into that. This is kind of people's lived experience and then kind of co-op basics. So, starting with like, what is a co-op? And, co-op, as probably most of us know, is a fairly broad thing. It's a group of people voluntarily spending their time and resources to meet a common economic or social need, and it's jointly owned and it's democratically controlled. This is a definition I really like from the International Co-operative Alliance, but it's a bit of a mouthful, so I won't read it out loud, but it's a good one.
Your slides aren't actually, we're just in the non-present view.
Oh, what? That is weird. Why? I hate Zoom.
It's possible you paused the share.
I tried.
Now do you see it?
Close and then reshare.
Yeah. Okay. How do I stop sharing again? Oh my God, this is embarrassing.
There should be a stop
share right there. Yeah.
Okay. It's okay. Being good at Zoom is not a skill that we like really want for the long way.
Right, people are seeing that.
You're really good at Zoom.
They're here? Good. All right. So a housing co-op is a nonprofit membership-based entity that has housing. So we're talking about the co-op. A co-op is a group of people who jointly do an economic or social thing. A housing co-op is one where that thing is housing units. And I've noticed that they tend to fall along two spectrums, one in terms of how they're owned and one in terms of how people live, where ownership is between membership is through having equity or ownership versus not, or living arrangement where people are living in kind of more apartment style things or more kind of co-living space. Co-ops in Toronto tend to be, this is not a total catch-all, but the vast majority are renter apartment style co-ops. So units are separated, fully separated apartments with a kitchen, bathroom, and living room, 1 to 3 bedrooms. They were made possible, most of them, though again, not all, were made possible by CMHC in the late 70s, early 80s. It's an incorporated entity that owns the land. Rent is used for maintenance, operating costs, planning to fix a roof, group activities like gardening. No residents have individual equity. I know of a few co-ops where there's like a ceremonial dollar, but most of them it's not done through equity. And they're operated democratically through a board, and a lot of services for co-ops are run through the Cooperative Housing Federation of Toronto, or CHFT. So that's my brief introduction. So I'm going to stop there so we can spend more time with our panelists. But if anyone has any questions, you can message me and I can try to kind of field some, or you can email us and we'll be giving our email later. And a lot of the more technical things we're going to be talking about in our next event.
Thanks.
Back to you, Emily.
Okay, now we will open up. Thanks so much for doing that. It's important for us to all be on the same page about what it is we're talking about. Sorry, I bulldozed through that. So I'll ask the question again and then open it up to our 4 speakers, and whoever would like to begin, I invite you to start. The question is quite broad. What makes life in a co-op unique? What are some of the benefits and what are some of the challenges? And we love stories. Is there someone who feels excited to start us off?
Well, I'll start. One of the things that living in a co-op is that you sort of control, you feel like you've got more control over everything. You actually work on committees. There's usually a board. It gets elected every year. And there's different committees to do different jobs. Like there's a maintenance committee, a membership committee, a finance committee. If you're on the board, you're usually on the board as well as one of the committees. A board usually meets, our board meets every 2 weeks. Some boards meet just once every month. So I think the other thing about living in a co-op is you get to know everyone. As someone earlier mentioned, most people live in co-ops for many, many years. And after a while, you've just gotten to know all your neighbors, and everyone participates on different levels. So that's my little speech for now.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. So the sense of like control is a huge one. It's a really different feeling than giving up your rent to a landlord or somebody who's anonymous, or depending on them to do the repairs, and kind of like, it's kind of like a little bit of a black hole that you're putting your money or your request into, as opposed to like a real person that you're communicating with, or a community that you're communicating with. But I wanted to follow up on the land acknowledgement and just think about this idea of like decolonization, and what does it mean for housing co-ops. And I think one of the things, the step that the housing cooperative movement in Canada, the nonprofit housing cooperative movement does, is it takes a housing out of the market. So it decommodifies, it doesn't decolonize. And that's an additional step that I think we really need to think about in terms of like, maybe it's our membership strategies. How do we recruit, or do we reserve spaces for Indigenous communities? Do we hold the land in trust in different ways? But I do think it's really important to think of the uniqueness of co-ops as being properties that are no longer being bought and sold on the private market. They're really staying as, you know, a community-owned asset for almost in perpetuity. You know, it depends on like the financial situation of the co-op, but that sense of no longer being a commodity, I think, is a really unique aspect of co-ops.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great things about being in a co-op. They're incredibly supportive organizations, both in terms of the social supports that people have talked about and just straight up economic supports. You know, like one of the things that's typically available in co-op is some of the members have access to rent geared to income, which is, you know, like critically important for affordability, because, you know,
Jim, can you give us some numbers? Like let's say somebody who's on social assistance, how much would they be paying? Let's say they're getting $700 per month from social assistance, Ontario Works. How much would their rent be about?
And for Ontario Works, at least for the policy in our co-op, is that the housing charge is equal to the what Ontario Works is equal to the shelter allowance, right? So the same thing for, you know, for both Ontario Works and ODSP. And our rule is basically the Ontario Works is kind of shelter allowance is essentially the minimum. So there are some limits, but that's a really fundamental thing. And more generally, you know, one of the major advantages of the co-op is you're not paying excess rent to the landlord. You know, my estimate is that the landlords collectively in Toronto take somewhere north of $1 billion a year in excess payments from renters, and that just does not happen in co-ops. You know, like a co-op, what you pay is what it actually costs to run it. Now it does include, you know, like actually what it costs to run it, which might not be as low as you would like, which is one of the things that, you know, one of the cons about, you know, like controlling a co-op is you know, like one of the, you know, like there's a pro that's you're controlling things in the co-op, and there's the con, which is you're controlling things in the co-op. You know, like you have to take responsibility. This is, you know, one of the things I've said was that, you know, democracy is not a spectator sport. You know, that's, you know, like you know, like if you're going to effectively live in a co-op, you really need, you know, at a minimum, you need to show up at members meetings. You know, like the minimum standard required is not necessarily all that onerous. And in fact, one of the things about one of the major bones of contention is just exactly how much participation is appropriate. This is a major subject of conversation in essentially all co-ops. One of the classic works and very early ones was Don Area Co-ops Incorporated, DACHI, which is also a scattered unit co-op, which was built at the same time as Alexander Park, which was basically before all the other. We're actually the oldest purpose-built co-op in town. And the subject, that book was called The Trouble with Co-ops. And the complete quote is, the trouble with co-ops is that people have to cooperate.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of an introduction to the cons side of things.
Well, before we move on to that, but yeah, I think that is a good way to frame them. Rita, I just wanted to pass it to you, but I was also wondering, you know, we've talked about co-ops being these kind of both socially and economically supportive, and I've just spending on time with you online for the past like few months, heard a bunch of ways in which you've supported people and ways in which the community has supported each other. And I was wondering if you could maybe tell, give an example of some time that the community's kind of come together for someone or a group of people. Larita?
Okay, sorry, I thought you were asking Jim, but yes, I have so much to say because this was awesome. So,
It's okay.
definitely, thank you. All right, so answer what makes co-op unique, and this is something I didn't realize because I was born and raised in this co-op, and so this is the story. I love stories too, and that's my favorite way to explain these. So it was in the 70s, and my mom had lived in the East End, and she was married, and her husband found a co-op that was coming, that was about to arise, and he saw it was a Spanish speaking co-op. So he said, we have to go here. And that's when finding newspapers in the ads. So they moved in right away, and that was in the 80s. And my brother was born in, my eldest brother is born in 81, and my youngest brother is 90 and born in 98. So we've been in this Arauco cooperative housing since the 80s, just about. So we weren't the first people here, but we were a big group of it. So I feel like that's something that's very unique, is that how long people have stayed, and making it like a really big community. Now there's a question. It does get diverse. However, it's diverse in a different sense of, like, I'd say, about age demographics. So something we notice is there'll be periods where there's no children, and at least in our co-op there's very little children, but then you see there's a bunch of groups of kids born around the same age, and then there's a little pause, like maybe 5 to 10 years in between, and then there's another group of children born. So there's always a generation that's growing up, and we see that. And so that's a pro, I'd say, like being able to see this. So that's something also that I see very positive, is having that community and community support. It's very difficult because sometimes we don't all get along, where everyone's different, but for the most part, even though you might not get along with somebody, you're still there to support your neighbors. And but that is, since that's actually what I just saw, I looked out my window and I can see like two neighbors on their balconies just chatting with each other, and they're family members. So it's really sweet to see, because at Arauco we're townhouses, and most of the co-ops here are townhouses, and we have our 1-bedroom units are 1-bedroom walk-ups, which comes to the question of accessibility. And when these co-ops were built, there wasn't very much in mind thinking of how our members going to age in these communities, and how that would be accessible. It was mostly attuning to families and to younger people, younger individuals. So that's something I think most co-ops are dealing with right now, is aging populations and accessibility. So that's a favorite. Another pro would be, with this situation with these cohorts of children, it's the saying, it takes a village to raise a child, and I feel like I have like I'm a result of that. And my brothers and sisters, everybody would scold us if we were having a little bit too much fun, I know. So that's what I call it. I have grandparents here. I didn't know my grandparents because my mom immigrated from Colombia, but my grandparents are Chilean. So they're still South American, but they're Chilean, and they have their grandchildren alongside us. So they kind of adopted us, and we would have our mud pie fights, and on a rainy day, and then they would hose us down with cold water. So that's how we learned not to do that ever again. It was once, and we had a lot of fun, and never again. It was enjoyable. We got to explore with the worms and have our lavender trees like smelling so good. And even I got to see this change in the co-op. But there's so much to talk about, so I hope so Josh, your question, sorry, I wanted to answer your question. I hope.
Yeah, my question, I think you've given like definitely that last thing was an example, but the question, which I'll pose to the rest of you as well, is like an example of a time when the community kind of came together to support somebody or a group of people. Like we're talking about this like socially supportive, infrastructure, and it would be great to get an example of that.
I have a question actually as well that I'd like to pose to everyone too. So the question is, have any of your co-ops gone through or gotten through out of apathy in the memberships? Because what Jim said is very true. To be in a co-op, you have to cooperate, and that's actually a huge issue right now. And I think in my co-op personally, because it's just trying to find people who come out, because the people who were on the membership committees and the I forgot the name of this committee, the one who does the anniversary parties, I forget that one.
The social committee.
Social committee.
I might jump in here because I think I'm probably the one who has a different perspective on this. Like I actually think that like one of the really nice things about co-ops is that you can do as much as you want or can do. I think there is definitely an aspect of responsibility, but there's not a necessity to participate. And I know in our co-op, we went through, when I joined the co-op, we were not in the greatest situation. Sometimes we had years where we were in the red, which meant we were operating with deficits. And that means that we're struggling really, really hard right now to do a bunch of capital repairs. But the sense of like community or involvement or activation of our community was very, very low. And part of the process of trying to get people re-engaged was both the urgency of capital repairs and the end of, so Jim had told us about rent to gear to income. And that's a program that's government money that subsidizes the housing cooperatives. So we don't subsidize people on Ontario Works or anybody who's on rent to gear to income ourselves from our own rent. We get the money from the government to provide those subsidies. So we still, as a co-op, get the full amount of rent or housing charges, but the government subsidizes the difference. So if somebody's on Ontario Works and they're paying something like, $125 or around that amount for their housing charge, and their unit actually costs $800, the government will give us the $685 difference or $675 difference. So it's amazing to have those programs, but that apathy question is a challenge. And one thing that really got our co-op to get more engaged was the people who show leadership, making it more fun, doing things like parties or social events, making it feel as though it's not necessarily like the hardest thing, but it's actually like a positive thing. But personally, I do believe that like a good neighbor is somebody who might take out the garbage. A good neighbor is somebody who doesn't play their music super loud at 4 a.m. unless they've given you a heads up that they're going to have this crazy party because it's their 30th birthday and it happens only once every 30 years. So I don't know, that's just an alternative perspective to the apathy question, because yes, we do have a responsibility within co-ops, but everyone has different abilities, different situations in their lives. And so for me, I think it's really about encouraging people as much as possible while also being open to the reality that, maybe somebody is just acting like a renter, essentially, even though they're a member of our co-op.
I sort of agree that the people don't know. I mean, committees tend to be the mainstay for running the co-op, but there are people who they take out the garbage or they shovel the sidewalks in the winter. So they do things that don't necessarily mean that they have to be in a meeting, but they are still contributing to the co-op. There's people planting gardens, which helps the look of the co-op. Those are all things. One of the things, our co-op, our subsidy has come from many different places. Originally, it was the federal government, then it became the provincial government, then it went back to the federal government. We've actually, at one time, and we still do partially have an internal subsidy. So we actually put money in ourselves for the subsidy. The last one was the federal government we were kicked off the federal government subsidy, and now it's a city subsidy. But we've managed all along, and I think that's how you help other people. It's the idea that if you get into trouble, if you've lost your job, that the co-op will support you while you're trying to get through that, and you can go on to a subsidy and be helped that way. I think that's a big thing. Our co-op, because it's the oldest co-op in Toronto, our housing charges, we've managed over the years to, while we've rebuilt the buildings and done all kinds of repairs and that, we've still managed to keep our housing charge half of market rent in downtown Toronto at the moment.
Wild, yeah.
That speaks a whole lot more to what market rent is than it does to, we're on the order of $1,000 for a 1-bedroom. And I have a strong suspicion that that's, like if you have an apartment which has a bathroom and a kitchen, you probably can't do that for much less than $1,000. Or if you are doing it, you're probably skinting on the on the replacement reserves. So you're going to have trouble with the roof.
And another thing that our co-op has too is different co-ops, as a CHFT and through the CHF, we get deals like, so we've got a Rogers package deal, which gives us like unlimited internet, 200 TV stations, we get Crave TV, we get movies, and that is all included in our $1,000 housing charge. We don't have to, it's a $260 package that we've managed to get. And in your housing charge, that's $40 out of your housing charge. Most people jumped on it because it was unlimited internet. And they were quite happy to have that, especially families with children.
Our co-op is about to, our contract with Rogers ends in 3 years. And right now it's cable only. And you can see like the generational divide. Half of us, like the younger folks want unlimited internet, and everybody wants cancel cable, cancel, take it out, get rid of it. And
we totally went through that.
Yeah, exactly. So 3 more years, 2023. So maybe 2 more years. So I am definitely interested in trying to get that information, how to pressure Rogers, because we are with Rogers. Yeah.
What we did is our contract wasn't up. We negotiated with them because we understood other co-ops were doing it. And we did get a contract that's very, very good, but they made us, it's a longer contract than normal.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also got a provision for any new technologies that come into on stream, that we'll also be able to access those as well.
How long is the contract for?
9 more years.
But I mean, it speaks also to this idea of like different time spans. Being part of a co-op means that you don't necessarily think in the same renter way of like, I'm here for a couple of years or something like that. You really feel like this is your home. This is the place that you're really gonna be for the long term. And it might lead to some, less diversity in the tenure, but I think there's something really valuable to have a sense of home, maybe not ownership. And I think like not having that ownership sense, but still that sense of belonging, that this is my place, is hugely powerful.
Yeah, I think the idea that it's changing too. I mean, originally people may have been here for less amount of times, but as the housing market has changed, you can't go and buy a house. So you really are going to be here for the rest of your life. And so you do have to make sure that it functions properly. It would be very tough for most people to move out of the co-op.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I think a lot of young people also have to consider that not everyone uses, or not just young people, it's everyone in general who's up to date with getting internet, that are, since we do have such diverse age ranges that we need to consider everyone. So we can't just say cancel the cable because some people don't use the internet or home phone. So that's going to be something that at least my co-op is going to be dealing with. You guys already, most of you already dealt with it, so that's great. That's something we're looking forward to, and kind of figure out something that works between getting unlimited internet and receiving cable. So and negotiating and how we're going to get along to do that.
I love how this conversation got, or go ahead, Jim.
No, I shouldn't derail the conversation anymore. You should really move it back to co-ops rather than the wilds of telecommunications policy.
I was about to say, like, you really get a sense of like how what you had said originally is like, this isn't democracy. Democracy is not a spectator when you're in a co-op. You are making these decisions. You're having this conflict between different demographics and individuals. And it's really this like ability to be part of a civic or a governance process in a tangible way. I know for myself, like, you know, I used to do a lot of student organizing, and it was oftentimes kind of like telling governments what they should be doing or telling the authority what they should be doing. And when I moved into a co-op, I really had to be kind of sit with the idea of like, now I'm actually in a governing position, whether I was on the board or just a member. You know, it's this idea of like every citizen has a civic responsibility. And within co-ops, you really get this this kind of like really applied experience of what it means to govern, both in your local co-op, and then there's these concentric larger circles of civic kind of like participation. So Loretta was talking about her scholarship from CHFT, which is the Toronto level, and then there's an Ontario region, and then there's a federal level, and each of these levels of like cooperative associations is engaging with the different levels of government as well to support us, and we have the opportunity to like become part of that. So as a board member, then it's easy to like start to engage with CHFT or CHF Canada. And then there's many people from the co-op sector who then go on to have jobs or start lobbying the government or the co-op sector just because they were a member of a housing co-op. And so it's another unique and interesting part of the co-op experience.
Yeah, one of the things about Co-op Housing Federation, particularly CHFC, the federal one, in its annual meetings, it has the most profound commitment to functioning democracy of any organization that I've ever been part of, especially including political parties. So if you really, you know, like, so that's another thing is that, you know, like being part of the co-op movement, you get more practical experience with real democracy than you will just about anywhere else.
So we're getting a lot of questions in the chat. So we might start voicing some of them, and if people also want to say their own questions, that's definitely possible. I'll just one question I got was from Joan. I got it here. So her questions are around kind of some technical things, which I'm kind of curious about myself, actually. So why do rents not drop significantly once the mortgage is off is one question. The second question, does all the financing of construction of the co-op and purchase of land come from the CMHC? Is the federal government providing money to allow co-ops to expand? And how are co-ops coping with the pressure from the provincial government, being a conservative government? And I think we can, there's a lot of questions I've been seeing in the chats about this. So I would like to say that we're actually going to focus more on this stuff in our next session, but maybe we could spend, like, if anyone has any thoughts, like spend a few minutes on just thoughts on that.
Well, I wanted to say, yeah, once your mortgage is paid off, that's kind of great, but you can't really let the housing charge go down because your electric bills are going up, your water bills are going up, your buildings by that point are old and you have to make lots of repairs. You have to repair roofs, you have to repair siding, windows, bathrooms, kitchens. So it's a never-ending stream of money that still needs to be coming in to make a co-op function.
Speaking
Right.
from a co-op that had many years of, we never decreased. I think maybe there was one year before I was a member that there was a decrease in the housing charge. But what we did do, which is just as bad, is that we didn't increase our housing charges.
Right.
So when we had operating surpluses, we weren't thinking ahead. And so we're in a situation where we have literally made the decision to sell one of our properties. It's one of the most painful experiences that I've ever gone through as a co-op person. And like, I'm like emotional right now thinking about it.
Oh, yes.
But you know, that's what happens when you don't prepare for the future. At the same time, there are co-ops who have huge operating surpluses capital reserves, or even unrestricted reserves, which means reserves that they can use for anything. It's just money that they have in the bank, and they are in a position to grow the co-op sector, you know, using the equity, but also this free cash flow to be able to like increase the number of units that we have. So I'm totally with Jim. We need to keep increasing our housing charges at a very reasonable amount, not, you know, 8-9%, but like a 1-2% is really important.
An extra 1% over 30 years really does an amazing job of generating. I have been kicking ankles on that subject for quite a while now, and managed to mostly succeed. The question about one of the tricks is, by the time you've paid off the mortgage, by the time the co-op has been around long enough to actually pay off a mortgage, the mortgage is no longer a giant part of your cash flow. You know, it starts off at something like 50%, but 40 years from then, it's, you know, it's more like 10 or 20%. You know, I do have a phrase that says, you know, affordable housing is like trees. You have to build it 40 years ago. You know, 40-year-old housing is relatively inexpensive. New housing costs a lot, right? You know, new housing really does cost $2,000 and change a month for a 1-bedroom.
Yeah.
Whereas 40-year-old housing is more like one.
To the tenure and the CMHC mechanics question. So there's a few different levels of co-ops. There are city co-ops, there are provincial co-ops, and there are federal co-ops. And even within these different levels, there's different operating programs for those co-ops. So the federal level is where CMHC was involved, and there's quite a lot of these federal co-ops, and they are freehold co-ops. So that means that they own their own property and they don't have a lease agreement. A lot of the city level, and maybe the provincial ones, Jim might be able to answer this a bit better, but the city ones for sure tend to have the 99-year lease. And so they might be more susceptible to this tenure issue. But I think Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust and the Circle Co-op and a lot of the housing activists have done a huge fight to protect the Toronto community housing from moving to the private sector. So we do have a bit of some support around that for those city level co-ops. And then maybe I'll throw it to Jim to talk about the Agency for Cooperative Housing and how they operate as the partner to CMHC to support the mechanics of funding.
Well,
we actually, our co-op is very unusual because we were the first. We actually started out with 4 levels of the government creating us. So we, in the end, we don't actually own our land. The city owns our land. And we're actually in a negotiation with them at this very moment because we had a 50-year lease and it's over in 2 years. So we're negotiating with them. We're really hoping that they'll give us another lease. I mean, it's in this kind of housing market, it's kind of doubtful that they wouldn't. I mean, I suppose it's a possibility. So that's where we're at. We actually don't have much of a relationship with the agency at this point. We left we paid off our mortgage about 7 years ago, 5 or 7 years ago.
Something like that.
And since then, we've pretty much been operating on our own. I mean, we do follow all their guidelines, and we do follow all the cooperative. We belong to the co-op federations, but they actually, we're kind of on our own in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
We just
Could you tell us what it
operating-
used to be like?
what's that?
Yeah, I'd be curious about that.
What did it used to be like?
Well, it used to be that they would come, they would do yearly checkups on you to make sure that all your finances were going, that you were doing it. They would actually do come and do building inspections periodically, so to make sure that your buildings were okay, that you needed to be, if they needed any work, that kind of thing. I mean, we still do all those things ourselves because we know that to keep a co-op going, you need to do those things.
Right.
Otherwise, it would be a terrible, terrible mess.
Right. Historically, like my recollection is the oversight was pretty minimal, and it wasn't really adequate. And particularly the building inspections and stuff. That like we did a whole lot more than they did, and we needed to. Well, partly because we were built to OHC specs and cheated on when we were built. When the co-op was built, it was not a well-built building in the first place. And we spent a number of years carefully and cheerfully violating some of the rules of financial rules by having an unrestricted reserve, which we were not supposed to have. And they kept telling us, no, we were not supposed to have this until eventually, what I always described as the auditors went over to the dark side. And they started enforcing the rules, and that's when we had to change that. Basically, we weren't really constrained by them because we were out ahead of them, right? And we were basically working on making sure that we were not going to be in the kind of trouble that they would want to intervene. Like they would intervene.
The Agency for Cooperative Housing is an organization that was set up by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation so that they would not need to do the day-to-day oversight of the co-ops. And one of the major functions of the agency is that you do your income reporting to them in order to receive subsidies, as well as this minimal level of oversight, just to make sure that co-ops aren't completely going under. So they have these great little scorecards that tell you whether your walkways are cracked or not, or if your roof needs a bit of repair. Realistically, it's the responsibility of the board to be doing that work, but the agency was there to ensure that the funding that was the public money that was being given to co-ops was being governed responsibly.
Yeah, I think they're a great. It's a great guideline for you to follow as a board. I mean, they tell you these things to do that should be done, and then if you follow through, you'll in the end be in good shape. And it means that you also feel like you're more creating your own destiny by doing that.
Love to jump in here with a question for Larita. As a young person who's grown up in a co-op and also participated on the board, what do you feel like you've learned about participating in democracy and practicing democracy by participating in co-op life and also participating on the co-op board? It would be really great if you could give us an example or perhaps a particular story of the learning process for you.
Absolutely. So I think it was a great experience getting on the board at a younger age, I think, because I might have been the youngest one, because I like the village really raised me. Chileans are very democratic, and especially because they were fleeing a dictatorship. So a lot of people were very passionate about having democracy and having like a socialist agenda, helping each other out. So the process was very, again, we have to help each other and work together to build the co-op. And the process, what I learned, I did have to ask a lot of questions because I was on the board with our president. She's been on the board for like maybe 13 to 20 years, in and on and off of the board. So I've learned so much just asking these questions. And I think I know a lot of young people come also right onto the boards as well. And it's all about, I think, asking the right questions and getting onto it, because I know anyone who doesn't get who hasn't been on the board before has these questions. Like, for example, like the acronyms, there's so many of them: RGI, rank, income. I can't even think of, it's a whole
Alphabet soup.
yeah, alphabet soup that we have to learn. I want to create a document somehow to help people understand the co-op lingo that we have. Um, and really, it's my issue, I think, learning about the democratic process is understanding when different people coming on and off the board. So at my first my first round on the board, it was easy. Everyone wanted to get things done, and we all said, okay, let's get our backyards done and let's get it fixed. And it all happened because everyone got along on the board and we all had the same vision. But then 2 years later, we had people who had more questions and wanted to know more about uh, our finances and being frugal. And there comes a point that there is a visible division, which is kind of chaotic. It's chaotic for myself, in my opinion. So we have a west side of the co-op that is, our backyards are done, and then the east end of the co-op is a jungle. It really looks like a jungle. We still have our trees that are all wild. So you can see the past and the present in here. And I wonder, I have a theory that it's interesting because the half of the co-op that is done, we have a lot of participation. When we meet quorum, most of them are from the west end of the co-op that have this, they're participating, their backyard's done, they're happy. But then maybe we don't see participation from the other end because maybe they're not happy, or they feel unseen, or there's a whole lot of questions that we don't know. Maybe they feel left out of the loop, and that's something I'm interested in seeing. But the pandemic has brought that light, so it's put on hold. These projects are put on hold a little bit longer, and it's a really difficult question to see because these some people aren't participating, their worries and their questions aren't being answered and they're not being addressed, but they don't want to participate. So then there's people, those who are involved, who have to speak up and actually, I guess, be the voice for those who don't want to participate. Maybe get that dealt and solved, because there is a question. There has been a long-term interpersonal conflict, and that has been a co-op challenge here. We have like 4 big families, and we call it Game of Thrones kind of situation. I've never watched it, but there's 4 big families and we all consider from our last names, and that's the kind of conflict that we have here. Sometimes it's
I
yeah.
sort of think that this is one of the issues that can plague co-ops, is large groups of families develop in a co-op, or a group of like-minded people. It can be very destructive to a co-op because they can, if there's a conflict between the two groups, what we've done in our co-op is, and we've been doing it for years, is to try to stop that happening so much. Is when a member moves in, they have to be from somewhere outside of the co-op who's not a part of the co-op, and then the next So we go one in, and then the next one can be someone from the co-op. So this way you're sort of slowly interjecting new membership into new ideas and new people.
I love that.
I think we've been doing it for it takes a very long time to do that, but having large family groups can be very troubling with for a co-op. It's much better to have a broad diversity of people living here in one. And the other thing is, one of the big, huge problems in co-ops now is the aging population. In our co-op, I would say that almost half the co-op is over 50 now. And a lot of them are like seniors in their 70s and 80s. And that also becomes a problem too, because they've lived in a co-op for a long time. They may have been on the board for years and years and years, and they just feel they can't do it anymore. So you do have to have new people coming in to replace the old people all the time. It's a challenge to do that. To get groups of people together is a huge problem. And I think the idea is trying to have events where people get together and see if that might sort of bridge the gap.
Yeah, we had kind of a moment where we did a new era party. So literally trying to say like, this is a new era of our co-op. And one of the things that was part of it was kind of like a talent show. So we had some people in the co-op singing, some people, doing different presentations, barbecue. And it did really make it a nice shift towards people feeling like, oh, this is something I want to start participating in or be part of a committee. It's still tough going to get that level of participation. But I think there's something to be said about not just, telling people you have to do this, but also engaging them in ways that make it feel like it's something they want to do.
Another thing I think in a way to get people to participate is actually give them a specific short-term project. If you tell someone you want them to be on a board for 2 years, they go, I don't know about that. But if you say, we want to have a party, do you think you can organize it? Can you get the food? People are always willing to do short-term things. And so if you can get people to participate that way, I think, by specifically actually going and asking them if they'll do it. And very often they will.
I do want to get to the question about the wait lists and like what is an opportunity for us to like imagine more people in co-ops. I mean, the group that invited us to this panel is doing some amazing work. But I really strongly feel that this question of diversity is so important. And one of the ways in which the co-op movement has not become diverse or become stagnant in some ways is that we only have members as part of our governance. So we're not bringing in people who are not members of the co-op to help us inspire more activity and growth. So I think we're very risk averse because we don't have people who are demanding more housing from us. We're starting to feel it now because of the pressure, but I think about the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust and how they have a tripartite board. So they have part of it, which is the people who are members and using the properties of the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust. They have community members, and then they have people who are working in the organization. So I really strongly feel that, if co-ops started to give up their ownership to land trusts who might have more capacity to do the asset management, because they could draw from a bigger pool of people with those skill sets, and also be drawing to have membership of people who don't necessarily live in the co-op, to continue to push that voice of we need to leverage our assets, because there's over 4,000 units of co-ops in Toronto, if not more. We are valued in the billions of dollars. And the fact that we haven't grown on our own, there's one thing to ask for government support, but we're in a position now where we can act within the market to continue to grow. And we haven't done that because we're all comfortably living in our own co-op space homes.
How would we do that? So how do co-ops create more co-ops?
There is a huge question.
Yeah.
Nobody really knows the answer to that question. I mean, the thing is, because because we
Remortgage.
haven't done it, right? Now, some people that's not an absolute. Like some co-ops, there are some organizations that are, like trying to expand things, but they're largely not within the current co-op structure.
I mean,
Our
Vancouver,
co-op, we're
Vancouver has
actually
different
in the very early negotiations with Create TO, which is the arm of the city government that is trying to create affordable housing. And we've put a proposal to them is that if they gave us some land, we would actually run it as a co-op because we've been a successful co-op. Now, getting them to even actually come to meetings and to do that, they're semi-interested, but it's really early, but it's very difficult to get that going. But Creatio, they're who the city is relying on to build affordable housing, and they're using like city parking lots. They're going to convert them to housing. There's 2 in our neighborhood that are going to be converted to housing. There's one in Kensington Market they're going to do. There's one on Queen Street. And I'm sure that there's other properties within the city that they're doing that. And so to get them to help you out to get started is one step we're exploring anyways.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent are co-ops talking to each other? Because I'm noticing a question that Kamran is asking in the chat. Kamran, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure, yes, thank you. I just had a question. One of the properties that was sold from the co-op, wondering what happened to that and if the option was to transfer that ownership to another organization, like a co-op organization, to continue if they had a surplus of revenue.
I think Baldwin had the best answer to that in the chat in terms of the answer. And this is the thing, is co-ops are very risk averse. In the 90s, there was a bit of a growth moment for co-ops, and City Place downtown by the Harborfront was one of the big kind of purchases that CHFT did through their land trust. So CHFT has 3 land trusts that they own. And in that moment, there was also a situation where they were trying to continue to acquire property, and both the provincial and the federal government just pulled out while they were in the process of a project. And that really led, I think, the leadership, which has been pretty much the same leadership at CHFD for quite a long time, to take a more risk-averse approach to development. So I think that like organizations like the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust have grown significantly because they're willing to say, absolutely, we need public money, but we need to use organizing tactics to get the public money. We need to use private capital and things like their public, they're offering their guaranteed investment certificate that they use to create bridge capital to purchase properties in Parkdale, and using different creative things. So that, yeah.
Right. So what happened to that one property?
So Baldwin in the chat says they created a bit of a bank assets whose purpose is to help people to ownership, and who then would contribute back to the bank. So
I apologize. I'm on my cell phone. That's why.
No worries. No worries.
I'm actually sorry to put you on the spot, Ariel, but I actually just really like the question you just posted. Do you want to unmute and ask that? Would you be comfortable with that?
Yeah, for sure. I was just wondering if the members of co-ops, sorry for the background noise, if they take on co-op membership as a part of their sort of identity, personal identity, or if there's like a shared vision of I'm part of a cooperative housing movement, or or if it's just, this is where I live and it's just a, this is just my apartment. Yeah.
All of the above. and everywhere else on the spectrum. Yeah, that's very much, some people, are very identified with co-ops, and others just aren't. Like, we definitely have had members who are explicitly here for low rent because in order to scrape together money to buy a house. They were fairly
And
shocked when they found out how much owning a house
yes, a
actually
few of
cost.
them actually have begged us to let them come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on the extreme side, there's people who feel like they have ownership of their co-op. So that I think there was a situation in London or Windsor or southwestern Ontario where a co-op, when they ended their operating agreement, tried to convert it to a private ownership model. And the provincial government actually told them that they were not allowed to do that. So there's levels of people who feel like this is actually like something that I own, and then there's people who feel like they don't, and then there's everything in between.
Yeah, when we began our negotiations with the city for the land lease, we started off saying, well, we want you to just give us the land. We've been here for 50 years. You should just give it to us. And they said, oh my God, no, we can't do that. What if you decided to sell it afterwards and then it would take it off the market? So they don't want it to be going somewhere where it's not housing that they can claim that they've at least tried to provide.
Yeah, so the Dufferin Grove Housing Co-op, I'm maybe not the best person to ask this question, but I believe that it's been sold to the private market, and the proceeds of the real estate agents' profit from the sale will be going to the Parkdale Food Bank. There was an attempt to transfer the ownership to the Parkdale Food Bank, but that required
Joy McKinnon, faced.
And Bean has just let us know that it has sold. So, I think I think there's a lot of ways that could have happened differently. But when co-op members are afraid that their homes are going to fall apart, like literally fall on top of them, decisions are made in a way that is about protecting their well-being, as it should be, so that's for me why I'm really interested in seeing land trusts be more involved in actually the asset ownership of our co-ops, because we can bring a diversity of board members, people with more experience in terms of asset management, as well as, again, people like yourselves who don't live in co-ops but want to, and who will keep putting that pressure for the growth of co-ops, rather than just us who are the privileged few who get to live in the co-ops.
Yeah, I know I'm not on the panel, but just to jump on that, like I've been feeling more and more that there was a lot of questions about waiting lists, which I think some people, which maybe the panel could speak to, but my own 2 cents on that is just to echo Claire, like we all want to live in co-ops, and there just are not enough units. We got to build more co-ops. That's how you live in a co-op. We've got to make more. And I think I agree. I think that's done through land trusts and pooling assets.
Something that someone said is like question was how the individual co-ops speak to each other, and Arauco lives in a co-op in a neighborhood with 3 other co-ops, and it was only recently in 2017 that the organization that Josh and I are part of, that it was Jeannie and Gabriella, that they created a meeting between our 4 co-op board members and managers. I think it was just the managers. It wasn't the board members, to try to get this communication to begin, because we hadn't thought of that before. It was only recently. It's like, oh, we could reach out and ask other co-ops in the neighborhood how they figured the situation or solved a problem. And we didn't think of that. So that's something that we're going to start thinking about and trying to build more, like more units. And that's something, hopefully that flock, we've created a committee. I don't know, that's something not a lot of people know, but these 4 co-ops, it was the 2 founders that began having tea talks, and that's how they began on issues on police brutality, on Indigenous rights, having blanket exercises, and out of that we grew an organization, a committee from the built of 4 co-ops in the neighborhood, also members from Toronto Community Housing, and trying to get more communication between the co-ops. And now our project, so hopefully we'll be the first, if not the first, we'll be one of the first of many, or helping everyone to build these, to build a co-op. So we have a school that's in the neighborhood that is going to close because there's not very many children. So hopefully that school will be, the city can buy it and we can start building more units in our co-op.
Right.
Yeah.
There is a fundamental problem with new co-ops. They're not going to be particularly affordable.
Yeah. But they will be in 40 years.
40 years from now. Exactly.
Like,
Exactly. The classic example is,
so it's still worth it. It's still worth it.
It's absolutely worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Tom Clement, I've heard Tom Clement say that, nobody could afford to live in the St. Lawrence neighborhood when it opened. Right. But you can now. And I also suspect that was, like nobody could afford to live there in the same sense as nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded.
Yeah, we've got a little poster for advertising our co-op for when it started, and a 1-bedroom unit was $67.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
There's been some inflation since.
So in 50 years, it's gone up.
Not that much
I
inflation.
was thinking for 50-year increase, it's not that great an increase, considering all the things that we have.
For the people who were going to build these co-ops for in 40 years, who are going to live there in 40 years, help the rest of us who are not living in co-ops dream a little bit. Tell us a story, and maybe this could be a good way for us to close. A little story or anecdote about, what do you do with the other people who live in your co-op? What are some things that you do together? Larita, I see you unmuted.
I'm excited. I think the best memories I have growing up are the anniversary parties. Our anniversary, we're lucky it was in August, September, so it was fun summers, and we put up lights all over the co-op, balloons, and we danced. We would have the best part of the story is placing bets on when the police would be called. Sorry, neighbors, if there's any of our neighbors around, to see what time the police would be called, because we'd have our salsa, cumbia, all of our music just playing, and members of the co-ops some of them are talented DJs, and have our potluck and just have fun. The kids running around. We would at a time we had wild mint leaves, and we would crush them and make our mint tea. And those are the best memories. I've been staying up late, seeing the lights, and just enjoying the music and dancing with everybody.
Beautiful. Claire, what about you?
I'm going to throw it right back to you, Emily, because the pandemic, so our co-op is, and you were living very close to the Elm Grove Living Center that had a really difficult time at the beginning of the co-op. And, I didn't participate in this, so I feel like it's a story for you to share, Emily. But the support that our co-op with the rest of the neighborhood and people like yourself who was renting showed support for them. So maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, sure. This was sort of a collaboration, I guess, between the co-op and the aid pod that formed on the street. Would bang on pots and pans, as many of us did during the pandemic, we're still in the pandemic, but the early days. And we would walk around the corner to the Elm Grove long-term care center and wave at the folks who, one co-op member who's just like a really spunky, wonderful kid who's really into drumming. He would bring out his drum set and play for everyone, and people would bring out instruments, or they would just bang on the pots and pans. And we really developed a relationship with the folks in that long-term care center, got to know some of their family members, their names, made signs for them on their birthday. It was a really beautiful way to come together as a community, but also extending beyond the, right? Like including people who are renting, including folks who are staying in long-term care centers on the street. I really think that the sense of community on that street was in large part because the co-op already existed there and people were already connected to each other. And so for the rest of us, it was just easy to get into that same spirit of collectivity. Thanks for inviting me.
One of the things I've been really proud about is because of COVID, we've been reaching out to the neighborhood community centers like Scadding Court, Spadina, Fort York. We've created a food program for that we run out of our common room. We've got a lunch program for seniors that they get all during the week. So all those things I kind of think it's changing the attitude in the co-op too, that we're all working together to get all these things done. And I think I'm really hoping that these are positive moves done by joining with the community centers within the area.
Thank you. And Jim, do you want to close us off with a little anecdote together?
Well, unfortunately, Jim's stole my thunder. I have basically the same set of anecdotes that he does. So all I can really say is yes, like that.
All right. Well, that's a great place to close. Thank you all speakers. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your stories and your knowledge. To our audience, thank you so much for your interest and for your happy you could be here. We are going to let you all know about our next event. And I think a lot of folks here, especially those of you who are already living in co-ops, who are really interested in how we can grow the co-op movement here in Toronto, you will be excited to know that the More Cooperative Housing Collective, we're also called MCHC, just to have another
acronym that's
acronym.
quite similar to other acronyms.
Exactly. So our next event is, we're framing it as, okay, what is the past of housing cooperatives in Toronto? What's the present state? And it's kind of bleak right now. Waiting lists are really long. And then also having a breakout session where we can work together, brainstorm, what are some possible futures for cooperatives? So this conversation has already started here, right? Like people are suggesting more co-ops banding together, organizing together. So we're going to continue this conversation at our next event. It will be on July 15th, so it's next week at 7 p.m. And let me grab the link for that. Josh, could you talk a little bit more about what folks can do if they want to stay connected to MCHC?
Yep. So I'll post our email in the chat here, but also, it's annoying to grab things from Zoom. So Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but could we also email out a closing with that email and a link maybe for the next event?
Sure. Yeah, we can. I can send you a list of the people who signed up, and then you can send an email to everybody.
Yeah. So definitely if everyone's okay with that, then I'll do that. That's definitely the best way to get in contact with us if you want to continue this conversation. This is the conversation we want to have. We think, the co-op movement needs to grow, and we want to talk to people about how to do that. Yeah, and it's going to be all about that. We got Tom Clement, we got Keisha. I always forget her last name, Saint something. And they're both, and we're going to have an amazing conversation.
And if we didn't answer some of your questions, or you want to ask our speakers some questions, you can email us. I might have zoned out or just been busy in the chat when you gave our email. Did you do that? Josh? I know you also.
I did just post it again, but it's
Okay.
already getting lost. I'm gonna send out an email with that email. I think is the
Email
best
with
way to
that
go about
email. Sounds
it.
great.
The future.
And thank you so much to Park for your support and
Yes, thank you so much.
Parkdale Preschool. Thank you, Andrew, for setting us up with this event. Thank you to everyone who's here. Have a great night.
Yeah, thank you so much to the panelists,
Nice.
to everyone.
Bye.
Thank you guys. Email is so 1990. I love that. It is. It really is.
So Emily and Josh, I'll send you the recording. I'm going to stop it now, obviously.